My friend Christine Brennan and I have known each other since the 80s when we both started out in our respective fields. Christine as a sportscaster and sports writer, and me, of course, as a Cup reporter back in Washington, D.C. She's now written a book called On Her Game, Caitlin Clark and the Revolution in Women's Sports. I'm so excited to talk to you, Christine. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Oh my gosh, Katie, great to see you. And important to say, we did start when we were in kindergarten in the 80s, correct?
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
in the 80s. No, it's
sure.
okay. I'm proud of my age, Christine.
No,
and
me too.
We need to be. But
too.
this book is so interesting, and it's really about a phenom, as you call it in the sports world, Caitlin Clark. You spent 6 weeks on the road with Caitlin and the Indiana Fever, covering games, practices, and press conferences, interviewing players, coaches, administrators, and fans. And you have been in Caitlin Clark world for quite a while. How would you describe her?
She is, of course, as you said, a phenomenon, as we say in the book. She is the all-American girl grown up. She, frankly, is that girl that parents see in the kitchen every morning who is racing off to soccer practice and then changing in the car to switch to volleyball practice or lacrosse, or the neighbor who waves at the girl trudging off with the bag on her shoulder to another sports practice. What we have created in this country, Katie, and you know this with your daughters, is the opportunity for girls, the other half of our population, to learn these life lessons about sports that for generations we were saying no to girls and women. You cannot learn about sports, winning and losing at a young age, teamwork, sportsmanship, because of Title IX, which, by the way, has just celebrated its 53rd anniversary and has really come of age over the last, say, 20, 30 years. And so Caitlin Clark is that person.
She's a beneficiary of
She's
this.
a beneficiary. She is, frankly, what we created. And the nation has fallen in love with what it has created. Usually, team sports, obviously tennis and other sports are a part of the conversation too. But what do girls play at age 5 and 6? Soccer, t-ball. It's about team sports. And when we see the professional side, we often see the great names, obviously Serena and Venus Williams, tennis, an individual sport, or the Olympic stars like Katie Ledecky, Simone Biles, again, individual sports. So this is that first huge breakthrough team sport athlete, thank you Title IX, that literally the guy that wouldn't have been caught dead watching women's sports, that guy who thinks that it's just inferior, would never have been seen outside in a women's sports jersey. That's the guy, and I interviewed a lot of these guys, who are putting on the number 22 jersey, going to the grocery store, going to the game, planning their evenings around the starting time of Caitlin Clark's game. And, Hedy, you and I have been around a long time. I almost cannot believe that I'm saying these sentences about a female athlete, that this has happened in our lifetime. I didn't really think it would happen with the kind of TV ratings, the audience, but it's about a person that the nation, I think, has correctly fallen in love with, who is as publicly appreciative an athlete as I've ever seen, always thanking others, talking about her role, doing autographs before, after, making sure if she misses a kid, coming back to that kid, and not just girls. She talks about girls and boys, understanding the magnitude and the power of being the role model that she is. All of this, she was 22, now she's 23, but all of this at age 22, I say she's 22 going on 40 or 50. The maturity, the poise, handling every issue, lots of stuff thrown at her, lots of controversy, as you know, and everything about her, a maturity, an elegance, intelligence, and just also a sense of humor that you would hope to see in someone. And America, there she is.
I want to backtrack a second, Christine, and have you explain why Title IX was so important and what it did. Because as you said, this was 53 years ago. We're now seeing the fruits of that, presenting itself today. What did Title IX do exactly?
Signed by Richard Nixon, of all people, in June 23rd, 1972, that basically mandated that if a school was receiving federal funding, which all schools, even private schools, receive federal funding, Pell Grants, what have you, that they could not discriminate against female students in any way. The original intent was law schools and med schools. if you're federally funded, taxpayer supported, and then you're saying only men can get the funding, well, that obviously doesn't sound so great. Even back in the 70s, it didn't sound so great. And so the idea was, again, med schools and law schools. Within a few years, it started to be seen in terms of the athletic fields, an opportunity for girls and women to play sports. And the idea is proportional. So if a school is 53% female enrollment and 47% male, the idea then is you should have 53% of your sports opportunities for women, 47% for men. You throw in football, of course, that makes it a little difficult because that's usually 85 scholarships, and then how is it? It's hard to get up with all the other women's sports. But I think it's also been a mindset as much as anything else. The idea that girls belong, that there's a place for girls to play sports, and that it is something that parents want their child to do. Among other things, college scholarships. So now you have dads out throwing the baseball or the softball with their daughter the way they did with their sons a generation or two ago, because you see that carrot of potentially $100,000 a year, a college scholarship that your daughter can have just like your son from the past.
But also it's about sort of resources and facilities, right? That you have to devote resources and you have to give women's teams the areas to work out and weight rooms just like you do for the men, right?
Exactly. Locker room size should be the same. Now, we'll say this, you and I, not born yesterday, it doesn't happen everywhere. And most schools are not in compliance with Title IX even now. But one of the three prongs of being able to follow the law is actually that you're showing you're working towards compliance. Now, if this happened with another law, you'd say, what kind of law is that?
Right.
We're working towards, whatever. But in this case, Title IX has been very forgiving for those athletic departments. What it also means, and, for someone listening to us or watching us, if your daughter's playing high school basketball and they always have the bad times in the gym, well, that's against the law. It should be equal, boys and girls. And those are kind of things that I think that we've seen with this law, and you have to make sure that that is followed through on the local level, and that is a violation of Title IX if the girls are not getting the same opportunity in high school that the boys are, fields, gym time, start game time, etc.
How did Title IX directly impact Caitlin Clark?
So you have this, as I said, it's a law for sure, and it's a law that is still working its way through in terms of being followed. And of course, you throw NIL and some of the money that is now being paid, and that's not equal at all. But there's the other part of it that I mentioned a moment ago: mindset, the nation's mindset that it was acceptable for girls and women to play sports. When you and I were growing up, and you in Arlington, me in the suburbs of Toledo, if our moms and dads drove by a field and there was a girl on that field, or if we did, you're driving, the odds are that she was there telling her brother it was time to come home, for dinner. I mean, what was that girl doing on a sports field? Now, people driving through those neighborhoods, do you even have a second glance, third glance, if you see a whole team of girls playing soccer or lacrosse or running through the neighborhood? Of course not. That's the mindset thing that I'm talking about. The sense that we not only expect it, we want our daughters, our nieces, our granddaughters to be doing this, right?
So really it was the attitude shift that came with Title IX that created the environment for someone like Caitlin Clark to really thrive.
Exactly, because now, and also I think another key part of this, and I say this in the book, so 1972, Caitlin Clark doesn't come along till 2002, so it's a long time. So 30 years, basically 30 years. But there's stepping stones in the history of women's sports. You and I both know Billie Jean King very well. So when we're still kids in our respective homes, 1973, September of 73, Billie Jean beats Bobby Riggs. A very big deal, right? Especially for empowering for girls growing up. You move on to, say, the Atlanta Olympics in 1996. I think you were probably there.
I was.
Yes, for a certain network and doing great work. I was there as well. You're watching the Women's Olympics, where everything is about the great female athletes. Moving ahead 3 years later, the 1999 Women's World Cup, the soccer tournament, and of course you've got Brandi Chastain and the goal and whipping her shirt over her head and
Yeah.
all of that. And so that, to me, that was 40 million viewers on TV. It was July 10th of 1999, and it was over 90,000 people in the Rose Bowl. Rose Bowl, of course, well known as a great college football facility, packed to the rafters, to the gills. I guess there's no rafters in the Rose Bowl, but packed to whatever, to the top row for women's soccer in this country in 1999. A revelation. I'm going to give you a trivia note for your next cocktail party. Name the one story in the history of stories that made the cover of Time, Newsweek, People, and Sports Illustrated the same week. I've obviously given it away.
The World Cup.
Yes, Brandi Chastain and
Yeah.
her teammates.
But I'll never forget that shot of Brandi, kneeling on the field in her
Right.
sports bra, right?
Right, because she'd taken her shirt off, and people thought, oh, she's probably trying to sell the sports bra. No. She watched men's soccer for years, and because she had no women's soccer to watch growing up, and she was born in 1968, so she's coming along at that time that Title IX is really exploding, and so she's watching European men's soccer. What do they do when they have an important goal? They take off their shirt and they whip it over the head. So she said that's what she did, which we, of course, love Brandi for that. So anyway, that's happening. The nation is just fallen in love again with what it has created. And then 2.5 years later, a little girl is born in Des Moines, Iowa. And we have no idea who she is. And she's the one in terms of team sports that comes along at the exact right time as our nation is just loving everything that we have created.
As I mentioned, you spent 6 weeks on the road. Were you able to actually sit down and do a interview with Caitlin Clark? Because at one point, I know this was being called an unauthorized biography.
Yes, it is an unauthorized biography, and
Still?
it still is. And that can sound ominous, or
Right.
like you kind of just crash landed in. It couldn't be further from the truth. It's unauthorized because I wanted it to be journalistic. If it's an authorized book, you're then working with the person.
Right.
And I want to continue to cover these stories, and I am continuing to cover the stories involving Caitlin Clark, women's sports, the Olympics, everything else that I cover. And if I had been in business with Caitlin Clark, I couldn't cover her again.
But having said that, did she sit down with you and did you have a long conversation, or did you just capture moments?
Yeah, more capturing moments. I asked her probably about 50 questions.
Well, that's a lot.
Yeah, not bad. In fact,
Yeah.
I think, it's funny, as you look back on actually writing the book, I think I probably used about 1/3 of her quotes and comments. So I had so much, because she is, she's a great talker, and she goes on, and she answers a question, then she'll go off on a tangent that you care very, very much about.
So did you sit down with her, Christine, or did you just kind of grab her during quiet moments?
Well, what happened was press availabilities, which often involved just a few reporters. I could ask her anything, no holds barred. Nothing was off limits, of course. I mean, I would never agree to anything like that. Ask her tough questions, ask her, literally anything. For example, after she liked the Taylor Swift post that was, of course, Taylor Swift endorsing Kamala Harris. The next day, I was in D.C., and then that next morning I flew to D.C. or to Indy for that game. And she'll have 3 days, or 3 times of press availabilities during a day. Morning, shoot around, and then before the game and after the game. And this one was just before the game. And there were a few other people there. And when I stress that I'm with a few other people, some are from websites, some are young reporters. So they asked of course, some asked questions, some did not. But I always, asked 1 or 2 each time, for sure. And so in this case, it was, I of course wanted to ask her about the liking of that Taylor Swift post, because as you and others might remember, not only was that a big deal, but within a few minutes on X and other social media, a news story and other things came out about who liked the post. And it was Oprah Winfrey, and it was Kylie Kelsey, and Jennifer Aniston, and Caitlin Clark. So she's a celebrity now, being in the news about liking the post. And so, of course, I asked her, and I started out in a friendly way, because this is sports, and she is 22. And I've been known to ask a lot of tough questions and get people occasionally mad at me over the years, and that's part of being a journalist, as you know well. And that's, whether people like you or not, you're doing your job. But I started out by saying, as you know, you'd like to post that got a lot of attention last night. Big smile. And I said, I'm just curious what Taylor Swift's post meant to you, and are you potentially endorsing Kamala Harris for president? And Caitlin Clark answered the first part in about a minute answer, and then did not answer the second part. And I think that's probably a smart move by her. It's okay; she can do whatever she wants. Clearly, on whether
What did she say about the first part?
She said that it means everyone should vote, register to vote. All the things that Taylor Swift said in addition to the part about the endorsement.
Right.
And she avoided that.
And she's pretty savvy.
She's very savvy. Oh, as I said, 22 going, now 23, but going on 40 or 50. I mean, just as mature as anyone could possibly be in the midst of this firestorm of continual analysis, controversy, racial, misogynistic. I mean, you name it. Everything got thrown at her in a way that we've rarely seen for any athlete.
We're going to get into that.
But going back to your question, I mean, in terms of answering the question, so she and I did meet and have a one-on-one, but that was off, basically just a first meeting off the record, which was lovely. I mean, her handshake is firm. She looks you in the eye. We're the same height, basically. Just kind, thankful. She's one of these people who thanks you for your coverage. Which, as you know, not everyone does that to us. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the coverage. And then I also was in some practices where no other journalists were, and of course had plenty of time to talk to all kinds of people, her friends, her coaches, in-depth interviews to get those stories that she might not tell. Spending a lot of time on those kinds of issues, and nothing that was, if anything was controversial, I could ask. And she never said no comment. She never said, I don't want to talk about this. And a lot of the questions were also about basketball and what's she thinking and does she know when the ball leaves her hands that it's going in, and she told me that, sometimes she'll be pointing, like trying to make sure it kind of goes a certain direction, which of course she really can't control that once it's left her, but she knows, that it might be off a little. So that was that. And I can't thank her enough for spending the time, and that was usually, again, just around the team settings because it was quick, because with the deal, the book deal, and then boom, now I'm writing this book quite quickly.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about her childhood, Christine, because she sounds like she was a true multi-hyphenate when it comes to sports. She played soccer, basketball. She was also National Honor Society Presidential Honor Roll. Give us just a glimpse into her family life and her her parents, her siblings, and how this young woman was really formed and created, if you will.
She was formed and created on a basketball court or a soccer field or a golf course by a mom and dad who loved sports and had sports in their lives. A big brother and a little brother. And of course, the big brother was very helpful in terms of kind of toughening her up. And she started playing basketball. She wanted to play at age 5, and there were no girls' leagues for her. So her dad was coaching a boys' league, and she started playing against the boys. And when I spent a lot of time talking to her AAU coach, a man named Dixon Jensen, who is fantastic and coached her all the way through on the club level, not the high school level. And what he said was, that time she spent playing against the boys, which she went far longer, Katie, than most girls do. After a while, most of the girls kind of fall away and go play against the girls, which is what we want. The boys are getting a little stronger, a little tougher. Caitlin stayed till 5th, 6th grade. She was playing against the boys. And as Dixon Jensen said, it was perfect for her because the boys are a little tougher, a little stronger. And I love this when he said this, a little meaner. And Caitlin was learning to play against them. And there was one player who ended up playing for the Iowa men's basketball team, who in 2nd grade, his team lost to Caitlin's team. And he said, do all girls play basketball like this? He was like, my gosh, is this what all girls are like? And obviously she was born for this.
I was going to ask, did her parents and siblings and community and friends realize she was preternaturally talented right away, or was it something that they sort of discovered when she was in high school? What separated her from a really good basketball player who enjoyed the game to somebody who was next level?
Exactly. She says now, she says, I hate to lose. I hate to lose. I want to win everything. I want to be the best. I want to be well, that's it. I want to be the best at anything. And I think she honed that thought, that motto, that mindset on the recess fields of West Des Moines, because occasionally she would go a little hard, on recess, and mom and dad would get a phone call from the school, like, this is a little bit too much, and she'd get in trouble, as she would say, at recess or in gym class, because she was being too competitive. I mean, that's a pretty rare kid. I think, a lot of families get calls about a kid's grade in geometry or history or whatever, but to get a phone call that your daughter is being too strong and rough and playing too hard at recess. So I think what we're looking at here is someone who at the youngest age, and I've thought a lot about her, of course, writing this book, at the youngest age possible knew what she loved, knew she was good at it, really good at it, tall enough and big enough. I mean, she's not, obviously she's not.
How tall is she?
She's 6 feet tall.
Uh-huh.
And she's obviously slightly built compared to some women's basketball players, but still obviously a formidable size. And and she's fast. We see it on the basketball court. So the sport that she was actually excellent at early on in high school was soccer. And she was scoring goals like crazy. And she said she learned through soccer with the angles, the passing angles, because so much about soccer is passing, right? It's not scoring, which of course Americans like, why aren't they scoring more than, why is it 0-0 at the end of a game? Well, it's about the passing, and it's about space and finding people in space at a certain spot. Well, you watch her on the basketball court and you see those angles and you see her knowing where someone's going to be a second before they're even there. That comes from soccer. But she gave up soccer because now her basketball career is taking off. There's these younger teams that go internationally and play. So she made those USA teams. So now she's away, overseas playing basketball. So she had to give up the soccer as a sophomore in high school. But basically, yeah, that it was a. But again, I go back to the nation saying this is the moment, right? So she is. There's not a soul on earth who's telling her no.
Right.
Which girls growing up our age got it all the time, right? And what a shame. What as a nation, what were we thinking? Even 30 years ago, I'm sure a lot of girls were told, no, girls don't do this, you do whatever. Well, that wasn't going to happen anyway in our country at that point when Caitlin's growing up. But also, now go back to the kitchen, go back to mom and dad. With her dad, a two-sport athlete in D3. Her mom is the mother's father, the grandfather, was a legendary high school football coach at the same high school that Caitlin went to.
Got it.
You've got the older brother who's playing sports, played football at Iowa State.
So really in their blood. And did you get a chance to talk to her parents when you were writing this book?
I met both mom and dad, but they preferred not to talk to me anymore about that, which is fine because I had plenty of other material from other people. But yeah,
it'd be interesting to talk to them at some point, wouldn't it? Really do a profile of them.
I would love to do that. And as I said to them in the private conversations I had with both of them, I just looked at them and I said, I think anyone would say this, like, what an amazing daughter you have raised, Not
only as an athlete, but as a person in terms of the way she's handled herself.
I mean, Katie, everything has been thrown at this young woman. I have a quote in the book from a sports columnist friend who says she is the biggest racial wishbone that this sports columnist has ever seen. And of course, we know what a wishbone is from Thanksgiving, right? Being pulled this way and that way on any topic. Well, and so the parents, they did a great job.
Yeah, because it is tough. And we're going to talk about sort of some of the dynamics that have surfaced, not only for Caitlin, but for you in the process of writing this book and covering the WNBA. But first, I know you start the book with watching Caitlin play for the first time. Tell us about that experience.
Well, I'm on my iPad in my kitchen in Northwest DC, and obviously near where you used to live, in your old stomping grounds. And I was watching the Indiana-Iowa women's basketball game, February of 2023, and I was actually watching the game to watch the Indiana team, which was ranked second in the country, because all my siblings went to Indiana University. I went to Northwestern, and they all went to IU. And this team is great, so I'm just kind of keeping an eye on the game. Now, I'd heard of Caitlin Clark, but one of her most magical moments, where she literally was chucking it from the parking lot and it was going in, was happening while I was at the Beijing Olympics in 2022. So while I was aware of her, and I'd seen some highlights, I'd really never focused on her, right? Which is maybe sounds strange to people as a sports journalist, but I was busy with, as you know, the Olympics. When you're in the Olympics, that's
You're
it.
covering everything.
And we had the canceled or postponed Tokyo Olympics, so I was busy. We've got obviously COVID coming out of all that, so all the sports news that came from that and the cancellations, what have you. Anyway, so I'm now kind of watching this game, and it's right near the end, and it's at Iowa, and Iowa's losing, and last inbound, second half left, and the ball goes to Caitlin Clark, and everyone knows it's going to Caitlin Clark, and she's kind of sideways, and one leg's this way and the other leg's this way, as we've come to realize and know what it looks like, and she's just throwing that ball up, and it goes in, and she just runs off the court and goes crazy, and everyone's following her around.
They win the game by 1 point.
1 point, exactly. And you know what it was? I mean, I've, like you, I've covered a lot. I've been a lot of places, very lucky, very fortunate to have the career that I have, and have, seen pretty amazing sports feats, as you have at the Olympics and other places. And I have to say that I kind of watched the replay, and I watched the replay again, and what was it? What was it? And this really helped me understand the nation's fascination with her, Katie, to be honest with you. I wasn't the cynical journalist sitting on press row going, we've seen that before, even if we've never seen that before, or racing to get an interview and
Right.
racing to write a column. I could actually just sit there. I wasn't on deadline. I wasn't doing anything. And texting with the family, texting with a few friends. Have you seen that? Well, and watching it over and over again. And you realize you just you can't take your eyes off of her. What are we watching here? And yes, we've seen this from men zillions of times. Have we seen a female athlete who is really a high wire act, right? Sports and athletic for sure, but really an entertainer. And I felt very lucky at that moment to have this experience of kind of just wandering into watching this finale and this incredible shot, and they do win the game. And this, of course, it was a 3-point shot, as I said. And knowing that this is what the nation is seeing, and how you kind of are saying, what am I looking at, especially involving a female athlete? We've seen so many men get accolades over the years for so much. And as you know, I've written a lot about Title IX, talked a lot about Title IX, really worked hard for women in sports media, all the things that I care about. And I think that might have been it. This is something that looks, well, let's put it this way. It surprised me. It shocked me. And probably like you a little bit, we've seen a lot in journalism, and it's like if there's something that is new and fresh and exciting that really does kind of hit you. And in my kitchen on that February day, that hit me. And it hit my siblings as well. Like that you're not going to see that very often. And then, of course, within a few weeks, she's now going to the Final Four, and they're upsetting South Carolina, and now she's taking an Iowa team that was not expected to do anything all the way to the final game, and now the nation is just kind of falling in love with this athlete that you're watching. I understand that, and I think that's helped inform me and understand what people might be thinking, because I kind of went through it at that moment in my kitchen.
There was a confluence of factors that allowed Caitlin's career to skyrocket. One was NIL, name, image, likeness. You said, quote, by the time Clark was done with college, she reportedly had at least 11 NIL deals worth more than $3 million, including TV commercials such as her ubiquitous State Farm spots that made her even more recognizable. Why did these brand deals have such an enormous impact on Caitlin's celebrity and really the entire NCAA?
If you think back to athletes a generation ago, college athletes, you'd be watching them, and then they'd go off your TV, or you'd go to the game, and then whatever.
They disappear.
Right. They're not hanging around, from 1 minute to the next. The thing that always hit me about Caitlin Clark, and again, just kind of as a journalist, as an observer, not as a fan, but as just observing this from with my my journalistic brain, but not necessarily at press row. So you're watching a game, and there she's playing in this game, and she's probably doing something pretty crazy and amazing. Okay, then it goes to a commercial, and if it's a State Farm commercial, now she's there, like literally 2 or 3 seconds after you just watched her in the game, they've gone to a timeout, and now she's in her uniform, standing there, may well be the exact same uniform, and now she's doing some of those State Farm commercials that we got to know. And it's like, there she is, she never leaves. What does that mean? Well, that's certainly keep it more eyeballs. Obviously people may run away and at that point and go to the refrigerator or something, but you're seeing even more of her. She is a part of our culture. She's not just an athlete on the court. She is now a pitch woman. She's selling products. She is, forging her path in a whole new way.
She's part of the culture and not just through her sports.
Well, exactly. And once you've crossed over, and you know this well, we've got quite a few athletes over the years that have done that. Certainly Serena and Venus, but Serena especially, right? The way she's done that. I mean, Simone Biles, Katie Ledecky, some of them, although they're all international athletes. I mean, this kid is wearing the black and gold of Iowa, right? It's not like she's representing the United States. I mean, she did as a younger kid, but in terms of where the whole nation is cheering for you. So,
right.
She's coming out from a different place and still rising as high as, say, an Olympic athlete. But male athletes over the years, of course, I mean, be it going back to Michael Jordan, of course, and
Magic
Johnson and Kobe and LeBron James and Shaquille O'Neal, obviously Tom Brady,
Steph Curry,
any number of quarterbacks, running backs, baseball players, etc. But when we're talking about that, of the hundreds, of the thousands of athletes who have graced us with their presence, and been cheered in stadiums around the country, it is still the very few that then cross over and are part of the culture. And here's Caitlin Clark doing it, and to the point you're making about NIL, she's doing it while she's still in college. It's not like, oh, now she's a pro and doing it. She's doing it at a very early age. So if you're looking at that launching pad into everyone's kitchen and everyone's living room, and why people now are just saying, I've got to make sure I've got Ion on my TV. What is Ion, and do I have it because she's playing at this hour? Well, that started with those college games, especially senior year, and also social media. And I think that's a big part of it. We get to know people clearly through social media, and this is whether it's Taylor Swift, whether it's your favorite actor, actress, whatever it might be, maybe favorite journalists. And so again, the Iowa players are all over social media. So you're looking at this, and they're funny, and they're playing pranks, and they're giddy. And again, if you're buying my argument that this is the girl next door, and that everyone in their family has a girl next door, or the girl that they were driving to the practices, and now you're watching this group of really fun young women who are doing this, that's another way, it's another entree, frankly, Katie, another entree into this world where now you feel like Caitlin Clark. And when she's ready to explode junior, senior year, and then into the WNBA, where she basically doesn't miss a beat after a few games, well, it can even explain more this incredible popularity.
There has been a lot of discussion, as you know, Christine, and here we are, two white ladies discussing this, about the role race has played in the ascendance of Caitlin Clark. Angel Reese, who is another basketball player, she was a star at LSU, has often been pitted against Caitlin Clark, being cast sort of, in her view, as the villain role in the media and by the public. And she has said that hasn't been easy. She also said, quote, "All year I was critiqued about who I was. I don't fit the narrative. I don't fit in the box that y'all want me to be in. I'm too hood. I'm too ghetto." So I'm curious about the fact that Caitlin Clark has been so celebrated, and in some ways, Angel Reese has been so criticized, and what you make of that.
Yeah.
Because I think that is a central theme of a lot of this coverage.
Oh, without a doubt. Now, part of it, of course, is rivalries, right, in sports. And so we always want to say, the good one, the bad one. I mean, Red Sox, Yankees, Michigan, Ohio State. There's a natural, I'm not minimizing this at all.
Right,
but there's a natural.
This is more than that, I
think.
It's
way,
right?
Well, it's
because
way more.
When you're talking about the Yankees and the Red Sox, it's not really about the racial component.
No.
It's really about the region, right?
Without a doubt. And no, but what I'm saying is there is that natural, that everyone's looking for rivalry.
Right.
I mean, that's a fact. The quote you just read is in the book, and I make a very strong effort to obviously quote Angel throughout and when the issues are coming up. And in fact, I tried, I think about 3 times with Angel's people to get her to talk to me for the book, and she did not want to do that. And that was a disappointment because I wanted her voice more. I wanted to be able to ask her some things, but that was, of course, her choice. So, of course, the relationship goes back originally. Angel was at the University of Maryland, and of course, that's in the Big Ten and playing against Iowa. So the idea, Angel and Caitlin didn't just meet at the NCAA championship game. They had games against each other. But as far as we know, nothing major had happened. Now you move to the final. And it is totally understandable, and I spent a lot of time in the book on this, looking at the move to the WNBA with voices that I know and just terrific people that I feel I'm so glad spoke to me for the book. Dr. Harry Edwards, Brianna Scurry, the goalkeeper from the 1999 women's soccer team, talking about these issues, because you're right, here we are, 2 white women talking about the issues of race and from our point of view.
And talking about a star white player, right?
Exactly, which of course is what I wrote about, right? But within that book, I really made an effort to have, again, these voices that are so important. Dr. Harry Edwards, for example, talking about Caitlin moving into the WNBA and talking about the mistakes the WNBA made in terms of preparing the black players for the moment. And there's so much there. Brianna Scurry talking about that, Tamika Catchings. And I'm saying that because as a journalist, you want the full story, right? And it is not the full story to just talk about it from Caitlin's point of view. What happens with Angel, of course, is that final game, LSU wins big, Iowa loses. Angel is the national champ. Caitlin is not. Near the end of the game, Angel was following Caitlin around and putting her hand in front of her face, mimicking something that Caitlin had done a week or so earlier. Everyone thought it was to a teammate. It turns out that was everyone thought it was to an opponent. Turns out that was wrong. The opponent even said that it was to Caitlin's bench. So something that kind of got going and became quite a thing, a meme and everything else, turns out the genesis of it was wrong. Caitlin was not mocking an opponent by doing the John Cena, you can't see me thing. She was sending it to her bench. So Angel picks it up as something that was, again, not necessarily no fault of her own, as something that Caitlin was doing to an opponent. So Angel does it to Caitlin. She also made sure to point to her ring finger where her ring was going to go. And of course, everything explodes from there. There was a positive in all this that I found. I was trying to do a lot of talking about it on CNN and ABC. People were talking about women's sports in a way we haven't in a long time. That's the positive. The negative, as we have now come to see, and as you're alluding to with your questions, is how this all of a sudden became racial, pitting people against each other in our very polarized society. No surprise to anyone that we've got lots of people on both sides on all of these topics. And there's a lot of hate and a lot of negativity. And I think it's important in the book. When I quote Angel, I did ask her a question or two one question at a press conference. I wish I'd had more opportunities, where she says, I don't hate Caitlin, and Caitlin says, I don't hate Angel. And so this world around them it's created a rivalry, and then you throw in race, and you throw in quote unquote taunting, which is something that happens in all sports. And Caitlin certainly can throw it back at people. Caitlin is not a saint out there. She's not, she's not Mother Teresa out on the court. I mean, she's also throwing it back at people as well. But this is how this started. And for me as a journalist, I play it straight. I put the quotes out. I tell the story. I don't think I'm even analyzing it at that point. I'm trying to put it out there and let people see what is said. And that's why, again, it would have been great if Angel had talked to me. I would have loved more her analysis on it and looking back on it and trying to make some sense of it.
It seems to me that whenever this happens and women are involved, it becomes so exaggerated, this desire to create these so-called cat fights, right? Mm-hmm. Where I think if men were doing this, or male athletes were engaging in this kind of taunting or activity or whatever, it would be sort of par for the course. Mm-hmm. But I feel like when it's women, it's just put under this microscope. Do you think that's true?
Oh, certainly that's the case in some ways. But then there's the flip side, which is people are paying attention. And the microscope is there.
Well, and you think all attention, like all publicity is good publicity?
Not all necessarily, but in this case, here's how I'll frame it. No, and it's a conversation that, my goodness, we could talk for hours just on that alone, right? And we're clearly not going to do that. But so you've got this happening, and Angel wins. And I mean, it is crystal clear. We, of course, say that. Angel's the defending champion. Caitlin loses. You've got Dr. Jill Biden then saying, well, we want Caitlin in Iowa to come to the White House, too. And, of course, Angel, Reese, and LSU, they're furious about that. And then even Caitlin Clark says, no, we're not going to the White House. So there was a lot going on, right? There's a lot going on. It is absolutely, there is a racial component to all of it. I am absolutely aware of that as a journalist. You are aware of that as a journalist. We would be foolish and not doing our jobs to not realize that, right? But what you've also got is a story about that are when you're talking about it on air, people are showing highlights of women's basketball. There's great athletic feats. I'm literally in New York on a CNN morning show. It's the night of the day of the men's final that night. We're not talking about the men's final. We're talking about the women's final. And I am not going to be a Pollyanna and say, oh, that is just all fabulous. But there is an element of that has never happened before. Again, going into the mainstream, crossing over out of sports, that is a positive. That night, I'm on CNN again talking about it, and the real kicker was Thursday of the Masters. I'm now down at Augusta National. Tiger Woods is teeing off. Am I at the first tee? No, I'm not. I am doing another TV hit on my laptop. What am I talking about? Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark. There is an element to this that is good, because if you have been wanting coverage for women's sports, which I certainly have worked my career for, in addition to covering obviously many men's sports, this is a moment that you'd say, good, people are discussing this and are talking about it. I don't disagree with you that the male-dominated sports media certainly will probably go to that lowest common denominator that we wish they would not, and see it as a catfight, or see it as two women, two girls, whatever, doing whatever they're doing. But I also wish to look at it in a better sense, that it is giving publicity to two great athletes who do very different things. Angel's 3 inches taller than Caitlin. Angel is rebounding. She is, as Caitlin says, she has got a motor unlike anybody. In other words, Caitlin's giving total praise to Angel about how hard she works, how amazing she is. She just does not stop rebounding, finding her teammates, trying again. Obviously, again, a fabulous, great career. So I tend to, and maybe I'm being a little too optimistic about this, but I tend to see it more as a positive. I certainly am not seeing as a positive racism, a racial aspect, anything that's tinged with that. And one of the things in the book I come back to over again, because there's sugarcoating nothing, dealing with everything that happens. Caitlin's being pressed on the issue of race, and first answer is not necessarily saying all of her fans and all of the people online and social media. She didn't necessarily distance herself or even criticize that. A couple hours later, she comes back, being asked about it again, specifically about racism and negativity, that people are using her name to go after people like Angel Reese or whoever. And she immediately condemns it and says, do not use my name for those purposes. So I think it's been a work in progress. I think it has probably been a shock to the system of a lot of people that, one, we have an athlete who has gotten so famous so quickly and is so beloved by so many people that never cared. You throw in the political climate of our society, you throw in racism, which is real, and you and I will never have a moment in our lives that understand what that and know what that means. I'm aware of that every second of my life. I'm sure you are as well. And you throw all that in, and you've got, well, something that's amazing, can be troubling, but also there is a lot of good, not in racism, no way, but there's a lot of good in the story of these two women. And when Caitlin passes the ball in the All-Star game to Angel, and Angel makes the shot, and that's an assist, and the place goes crazy, and the announcers say, this is what you've been waiting for, and they slap palms on the way down. All right, now there's a little moment that shows you they respect each other as athletes and as people, and I truly believe that's the way Caitlin Clark looks at Angel Reese, and that's the way Angel Reese also looks at Caitlin Clark.
I think one of the things that has exacerbated this dynamic is the fact that the WNBA is historically and overwhelmingly black. 74% of players are black or mixed race. Last year, there was a huge backlash from the WNBA Players Association when you asked Dejanay Carrington whether or not she poked Caitlin Clark in the eye. In the statement, they said, quote, that so-called interview in the name of journalism was a blatant attempt to bait a professional athlete into participating into a narrative that is false and designed to fuel racist, homophobic, and misogynistic vitriol on social media. Why do you think that question was so provocative for Carrington and the rest of the team?
Yeah, that certainly was a very important moment. And first things first, the 74% is something obviously that I worked to make sure I got that exactly right. And I have a whole chapter, as you know, on the foundation of the WNBA, which, by the way, I covered way back when. And, this is a league that is known as a black league. A sizable portion of the women are gay. I deal with all that in the book. I want to deal with that in the book, and I think it helps people understand, frankly, where we are now. Because, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Harry Edwards, I wanted his voice. We talked back in August, well before people were mad at me about asking a question and a follow-up. And I talked to Dr. Harry Edwards, and this is a league that is again 74% black league, and now you've got this white woman from Iowa coming in and being the superstar. And
if I were a black player, that would bug the shit out of me.
Absolutely. How about, in the workplace, right? Someone saunters on in and you're like, well, what about us, right?
Right.
I mean, of course. But
it's only natural that people would feel that way, I think.
Exactly. And this is the failure of the WNBA leadership, and this is a big part of the book, as you know, that how on earth can you not see all of junior year of Caitlin Clark, the crowds, senior year, people standing in line in January and February for hours waiting to get into Big Ten arenas, 18, 20,000 packed to the rafters to see this woman, and not go, you know what, maybe we should talk to our athletes about this. Maybe we should prepare them. Katie, not because they're damsels in distress. They are not. They are terrific, strong, fabulous women who've gone through a lot and are great athletes and have reached the pinnacle of their sport. They're the women who I praise in the book and my columns in USA Today, how they fought for Britney Griner to get her back from Russia. I don't think there's ever been a finer moment in professional sports history in the United States than what the WNBA players did to get Britney Griner back, fighting for her. So this is something that I've cared about. Another fascinating thing, and it's people don't realize it, and I'm saying this because it's so important that people realize how ignored the WNBA was. How these black players, obviously majority black league, was ignored by the mainstream sports media, male-dominated, and for years, and frankly, how awful that is. When we think of 2016, Black Lives Matter, we think of Colin Kaepernick, right? A full month before Colin Kaepernick took a knee and made headlines. The Minnesota Lynx, who, by the way, young Caitlin Clark's favorite team, the Minnesota Lynx, their players started the protesting of the murder of several black men, and that was again in July of 2016. And the other WNBA teams followed suit. So the WNBA was a month ahead of Colin Kaepernick, yet other than a couple, I mean, it was covered a little bit, but your average person would never, America, people out in our culture would never know that. It shows you how little coverage they got and how you can understand how, wait a minute, what about us,
and
right?
how frustrating it was for them. In fact, you write about Britney Griner, and you wrote in USA Today, if this were a male athlete, not a female athlete, people would care a lot more about this story. If, say, LeBron James or Tom Brady were being held hostage by Vladimir Putin, well, they wouldn't be hostages anymore. They'd be home because America would have demanded it right away. It was a valid point, not that either James or Brady ever would have been in the position of having to leave their country to make a good living playing their sport as Griner did. Griner received more publicity and coverage for being in prison in Russia than for her then 13 years as one of the biggest stars in women's basketball.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's unbelievable, the lack of coverage, the lack of attention, the lack of respect that these women got.
The lack of resources, the lack of salary,
Well,
right? Even if you look at what Caitlin Clark was making when she was drafted compared to male basketball players, right?
76,000 to 57 million. Right. No, it's not even close. And of course, when people, going back to Britney Griner, well, why was she in Russia? It wasn't for the ambiance and to hang out with Putin in the great weather. Exactly, because the players can go overseas and make $1 million or something like that, more. I mean, definitely way more than they get in the WNBA. Her salary was probably around $250,000. So again, to supplement the income. So that's, of course, why Britney Griner was over there. So the point about the black players and how difficult it has been and how the mainstream sports media has ignored them, it is absolutely understandable then that, now you care about us? Listen, I get that. This is why I have Dr. Harry Edwards, Brianna Scurry, others talking about it from a perspective that I could never have, right? So, and then as far as, you asked about the questions, Dejanay Carrington. So I asked a question and a follow-up. Obviously, the Players Association was very upset with me and wanted to ban me.
Well, it seemed like you were pushing the narrative of a rivalry to me with those questions too, Christine. I have to be honest,
So let me ask you this. So those are the kind of questions that I've asked Tiger Woods and Michael Phelps and hundreds of male athletes. So are we saying that we cannot ask women the same kind of questions we would ask men in 2024?
Point taken. What were the two questions, Judy?
So I asked it when she went to Dejanay Carrington, and obviously this is a group of us around her, and so others are asking questions. And this story, as a prelude, this story was just exploding on social media, and millions and millions of people, hits, views, whatever. And so many criticizing Dejanay Carrington for with Caitlin Clark in game one of the playoffs, where she's kind of swatting at the ball. Caitlin, it turns out, is passing, not shooting. Her fingers end up right in Caitlin Clark's eye, and she's been being accused of things. She's being denigrated. She's being criticized.
Carrington
is for this, and people are saying she did this on purpose. How dare you do this to Caitlin Clark? The videos are magnified, and so you're seeing everything, right? Katie, there is only one thing for a journalist to do: ask a straight question, direct question.
Did you do this on purpose?
Right, because that allows the athlete to hit it out of the park. Frankly, most athletes understand, and maybe the WNBA players. Maybe this is another failing of the WNBA to not have prepared its players for national scrutiny, which is a shame, but they haven't had much national scrutiny. So most athletes know you can hit that out of the park. I am asking, you don't ask, I know some people said, well, why don't you just ask in general what happened? Well, that's a terrible question. You ask a specific question so then she can know, and she did. So I said, when you were swatting kind of at the ball, Caitlin Clark did you intend to hit Caitlin Clark in the eye? Either way, did you, yes or no, could you describe what happened? And proof that it wasn't like a hit job, not that you're saying it was, or that I had it all ready to go. You hear my voice. I'm actually kind of getting the question in my head as I'm asking it. We do that all the time in journalism. You've been in these scrums where you're like,
Right.
oh, and one more thing, and whatever. And again, it's fine. The analysis of that question is certainly the most analyzed question I've ever asked. Yeah. And that's fine. Again, that's totally fine. I would ask that question of any NFL player, of any Olympian. I'm not comparing the issues, but young Michael Phelps at age 19, his agent had me talk to him for 45 minutes about his DUI. Again, I am not comparing DUI with the fingers,
Right.
whatever, not at all. 45 minutes, Michael Phelps answered questions from me, like similar, tough questions. We're not their PR people, as you know well. And maybe they have not been used to scrutiny. But with Caitlin Clark's arrival comes national scrutiny. And again, the failing of the league to prepare the players for the moment is truly one of the stories of this particular era in the WNBA. It is such a huge failure. And I think if you have Dejanay Carrington in the Connecticut Sun, understanding that journalists come in and they may not always, they're not your friend, they're there to do a job. The follow-up then was about laughter that was, again, this whole thing is on social media because the WNBA, everything is on social media about most of these leagues, but certainly the WNBA, was about several videos that were shown with Marina Mabrey about with their fingers, and there's something called 3 to the Dome, which was a NBA players, kind of meme and something that he did, Carmelo Anthony. What were they doing? Were they potentially, again, people wondering? And by the way, I think it's important to say, I don't frame every question based on what people on social media are asking. Of course not. But when you see the magnitude of the coverage and the concern about these issues, again, if I'm the player's agent, which I am not, I'm saying you want these questions so that you can finally, equivocally answer them and put the issue to bed. Obviously, that's not how Dejanay Carrington and the Players Association saw it. But I thought I was giving them the respect that they deserve.
And a chance to really explain.
Exactly. And, again, the next day I was talking with a young woman who covers, a woman who I've, helped out, not necessarily mentored, but helped out as you and I do. And she was saying, I don't know that I would have asked that question, similar to what you said. And I said the same thing. Would you have asked a man that question? She said, oh, absolutely. I said, well, what are we doing? Are we coddling these women? No, let's treat them fairly and equally, and they get the same questions, at least from me. And they didn't like it. They got mad. They wanted to ban me. That failed miserably, of course.
Right.
Yeah, and it's too bad because, again, I think it all stems from the WNBA not preparing these players for what might be coming when you get national scrutiny.
How problematic was it, Christine? Because I followed this, but not that closely. How problematic was it that you were writing a book about Caitlin Clark while you were covering the WNBA? Because I read a quote by a former editor of The Athletic and the Washington Post, and you asked him to talk to you for the book, and he said he didn't want to. And he claimed your coverage had gone way beyond what is normal. He said the way she's covering Clark, I'm sure you've seen this, Christine. Sure. You're asking, is she Caitlin Clark's PR agent? So I'm curious about how you tried to balance covering the league while you were writing a book on Caitlin Clark. And I think as a result, it gave people the impression the only thing you cared about was Caitlin Clark. So I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Of course. And everyone has their opinion. That's fine, of course. I mean, so many books have been written by sports journalists about people, Tom Brady, what have you. And I don't think anyone has ever complained that those journalists have been asking questions about Tom Brady or whatever the athlete would be. In other words, for some reason, it bothered people tremendously that I was asking questions about Caitlin Clark.
I
Now,
think because they felt like you were ignoring other players or the bigger picture of the WNBA.
right, and of course, I'm probably the only one still standing who was covering the WNBA in 1999. So I certainly haven't ignored it over the years. And the Britney Griner column we've talked about. The first of all, I wasn't even around, obviously, before I had the book deal, except for a couple columns for USA Today right before the Olympics. And my USA Today editors, who of course control, or at least give me,
Your assignments.
yeah, so give me advice. I don't, contrary to popular belief, I do not run and make all the decisions for USA Today. Wanted me to write and focus on Caitlin Clark because guess what? Caitlin Clark is getting all the clicks and whatever, and it's very easy to focus on Caitlin Clark. So I'm at the Olympic swimming trials, which are in Indianapolis. I go over and cover 2 games, and both games were, of course, Caitlin's playing great, and people care about it. I will say I'm also quoting in those columns Aaliyah Boston and others. This notion that I only focused on Caitlin Clark or only talked to athletes about Caitlin Clark is ridiculous. In that same story that you were referring to, by a journalist who I've talked to quite a bit, who I support and want him to do well, but I've told him he interviewed someone about my questions who could have been around me only 3 times out of about 20 games. This journalist, this young broadcaster. Sure, go ahead and do it, but how could that person know the questions I asked? It was real, yeah. So I would say this: it was surprising to me that they felt this way because I've been around dozens of my colleagues, our colleagues, friends writing books who have focused entirely on one athlete, and no one cared at all. No one was upset. What was it about this book that got everyone so upset? I will never know. In fact, of course, everyone knows how to find me, and they know it's a two-way street. I would love to hear from them. My guess is that they think I was working with Caitlin, which I wasn't. And of course, by the way, the notion that I'm a fan or that I'm pro Caitlin, there are things in this book, as you know, that obviously show Caitlin and with her behavior on the court that maybe she won't like. Obviously, she's not read the book. She has no editorial control, which again is the beauty of a journalistic look at someone. But I wasn't working with Caitlin, and so if they were fed up with Caitlin and Caitlin questions, then they're maybe getting fed up with me. I don't know. This is not in the book because what's in the book is what I could journalistically prove and 2, 3, 4 sources if I'm using something that is anonymous. But I would say this, and my way of reporting this was the same way I've done for my entire career. But that must be it, because I must admit, I find, and I wish someone would ask them, why did it bother you so much that someone's writing a book about Caitlin Clark? I mean, it's kind of a logical thing that someone might be writing a book about Caitlin Clark, right? And again, all the books written about Tiger Woods, I was around those golf writers all the time. They're asking every single golfer about Tiger Woods.
No
one
that
cared.
was an interesting way to look at it, because you talk about your coverage of Tiger Woods and the fact that you wrote so many stories about him and that you weren't writing about all the other golfers. And that
Right.
was because of his talent, his skill, his charisma, and how much attention he had brought to that game.
I would have been not doing my job if I was focusing on someone who finished 10th in the golf tournament. I think you can make a very strong case. Again, the book deal, yes, but even before the book deal, I wrote maybe 3 or 4 columns, including the Olympic snub. I broke that news. The charter flight story, I broke that news. News is news. When someone is in the headlines, when someone is creating news, when someone is getting these TV ratings, as a journalist, I guess I would say, and you're not the spokesperson for these people that you're quoting, what would you want someone to do? So would they have then said, no, don't cover Tiger Woods, cover the person who just finished 8th or 10th? I mean, it sounds like maybe that's what they would say. Or what else is going on? And I would love to talk to them. That person has a standing invitation, of course, to talk to me anytime. Everyone does. because, I love the two-way street and always. But it is interesting what worked for any other author probably in terms of writing books about people. All of a sudden,
Didn't
bother
strike
people.
this kind of nerve.
In this case, why is that? I'd love to know. If they want to tell me, they can call me anytime.
I know that you feel strongly, Christine, that a rising tide lifts all boats, and you feel like Caitlin Clark is a rising tide. Do you believe she has lifted all boats? And how has she done that, in your view?
It's a great question. I think she is and can be. For example, you look at what's going on with the Indiana Fever. So this is, of course, her team. It is with the Indiana Pacers, and it's the perfect place for her because you've got the NBA big brother helping the WNBA little sister, if you will. A league that is much more established, been around for years, much more money, as we've just talked about. And in Indiana, people are crazy about the entire team. Caitlin Clark cannot do every appearance, right? She cannot go to every gas station and every supermarket. Well, guess what? Her teammates go, and they are getting, obviously, some kind of an honorarium. They are getting the opportunity to see the fans. Their names are out there. They're getting all kinds of potential deals. Players want to come and play for Indiana. I mean, we're seeing that. We're seeing players who were competitive with her last year, like DeWanna Bonner, coming and having a year contract now with the Indiana Fever after being in Connecticut. So I think, there's a perfect example locally within her team.
What about within the WNBA? What do you think she's done for the entire league?
Again, when you've got TV ratings through the roof as never before, when you've got attendance that's literally, again, historic, clearly that's more money in the bank, right? That's more money in the owner's pocket, at least. They've got the collective bargaining agreement that is now up, and they're going to have that. There is no doubt that the players will be getting bigger salaries and higher salaries because of the wonderful, very rosy and sunny economic forecast because of the new TV deals, which is 4 times what they had before. All of this is because of it's Caitlin Clark. It's the Caitlin Clark effect. People can not like that. Facts are facts. Things are true. Perfect example here. You've got Sheila Johnson, who I've known for a long time. You probably know Sheila.
I know Sheila too.
And she's, we're friends, and see her at events and things. And Sheila is the owner of the Washington Mystics. Sheila Johnson, the Mystics are at play in a 4,200 seat arena, about 10 minutes further away from downtown DC than Nats Park. So, down in Southeast DC, and so 4,200 seat arena. When Caitlin and the Fever came, they moved those games, Sheila Johnson did, to Capital One Arena, where they had over 20,000, including the record regular season crowd, biggest crowd in WNBA history, 20,711 in September, all because of one person, Caitlin Clark. So that is, I think, at least probably, $1 million each game, right to the Mystics. So that's clearly a positive for the team and for Sheila Johnson. Sheila Johnson then, of course, is the person who, quizzically, I'd love to speak to her about it. She then goes on CNN and is upset that Caitlin Clark won the Time Athlete of the Year award and said it should have been the League of the Year, and that something clicked, but didn't think that Caitlin deserved the credit. I would have loved to talk to Sheila, Katie. I don't understand that. You have just moved, for one person, you have moved your stadium, to a bigger arena, and then you're saying this. I would love to know the impetus. I would love to know the mindset. I'd love to know what she's thinking. What is that? Again, going back to the things we talked about before. We don't know the life that Sheila lived, right? Again, a Black woman, incredible leader, lovely person, great role model, everything about Sheila. And I gave her, I tried 5 or 6 times to ask her those questions, which is what we do, right? We are journalists trying to figure things out.
I guess I would ask you, does Caitlin Clark deserve all the credit for the rise in popularity of the WNBA? For example, the New York Liberty, I've been
Oh,
going to
yeah.
New York Liberty games. My daughter really loves the Liberty. Caitlin Clark has absolutely nothing to do with the New York Liberty.
Absolutely.
And I think some people would argue that the WNBA is growing more popular because people are appreciating all the players. So is it fair to give all the credit to Caitlin Clark?
Well, okay. Obviously, not all the credit.
And I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying too.
Right,
I'm just
right.
saying, I
But
think, proportionality, as they
yeah.
say.
Oh, totally. I mean, the New York Liberty have an incredible fan base, incredible success story, obviously, the defending champions. But 21, during the regular season, 21 of the 24 games that were over a million viewership involved Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. So, 21 out of 24. Okay, there's 3 that weren't, right? I think it is undeniable that this woman is the most important and best thing to ever happen to women's basketball. Katie, I'm going to say something that I actually hadn't thought of till basically right now. I wish she wasn't. I wish it had been all those incredible, fabulous women in the late 90s, right? That we covered at the Atlanta Olympics. I wish the nation had been ready for it then, or had wanted it then, or whatever racist feelings people had, or, you heard the stories about women's basketball, that they're out rolling around and there's always jump balls, the misogynistic anti-woman views that we would have about women's basketball. Hey, I played women's basketball. I mean, I played through high school and played intramurals at Northwestern, and I loved it. And so, I'm sure I was one of those people having a lot of jump balls, right? So it would have been great if it had happened. There's Maya Moore is a perfect example. Maya Moore is one of the greats of all time. She got nowhere near the attention. If we walked down the street right now and found 10 people, said, name a women's basketball player. Now, we're in New York, so we may get some Stewies and some Sabrinas, right? Hopefully we would. Maybe we'd get a lot of them. But I guarantee we'd probably get a few Caitlin Clarks. But we would get no Maya Moores, right? I mean, talking about Maya Moore is like talking about, those great, like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, right?
Magic Johnson,
right,
Michael Jordan.
right. But I mean, one of the greats. But we wouldn't get that. The nation and Casey Wasserman, the LA Olympic 2028 chair, even said this. We weren't ready for it for some reason. So we're ready now, and that's why I spend several chapters talking about Title IX, Iowa, and this launching pad that this young woman had. So it's not just her alone by any means. It's the nation being ready for it, as we discussed earlier. I wish it was 20 years ago. Oh my goodness. All those women who deserve so much better, so much more. I would walk into my sports editor's office and say, why aren't we covering this? And sometimes he'd say, sure, go cover it. And I would. So I fought those battles, but we weren't there. Now we're here. And this is all opened up nationally because of her.
And has given you the opportunity to not only write a book about Caitlin Clark, but satisfy the interests that now people everywhere will have in women's professional basketball.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And, and I think that's the positive for all, you've correctly, of course, asked me about things that are so important journalistically, right? And so important in our country. I don't have all the answers on these things. You don't have all the answers, right? As a journalist, you lay it out there. And that's certainly what I do in this book, and trying to have the voices to give people the best view that I could in writing it in 4 or 5 months, which was kind of crazy, but I did it, to have this book out now. This is an extraordinary time. And, I hate to see the vitriol. I hate to see so much of what's going on social media. But unfortunately, X is a cesspool. So when the WNBA says, well, we need to try to police this, well, why didn't you prepare your wonderful, fabulous, incredible athletes for what was coming? I truly look back, and I think history will judge that as this hit, and as some of these players had to adjust, understandably so, as we've discussed, and had to deal with all the hatred and the racism and all the things that were out there on social media, how on earth did the WNBA not see this coming and not in the NBA, which of course is a huge, owns what 60% of the WNBA, have them be a part of this to prepare these fabulous athletes for what was coming, the way that NFL players have understood for years, the way that Major League Baseball. This is new for women's sports. It's not a bad thing, but it required leadership, and unfortunately that leadership failed the players over and over again as Caitlin Clark was coming in the league.
Well, it's a fascinating read, and she is really so much fun to watch, as are a lot of the other players. And I'm so glad that you came to talk to me about this book, Christine.
Thank you, Katie. Of course, anything, anytime. We've talked about a lot over the years, so
Yeah.
I'm thrilled to be chatting about
And
it
I'm
with you.
sure it wasn't easy for you to be the focal point of some of these stories as a journalist. You never really
No.
want to be the story. You want your subject to be the story. But she's an incredible athlete, and it's going to be fun to see what she does in the future too.
Absolutely. I think there'll be a lot of people watching, whatever. But as that spotlight shines on Caitlin Clark, the point I made about the Olympics and everything else, it shines on all these players. People who never cared are now looking at all the other players, many of them, most of them Black players, and are seeing and appreciating them for the first time. That is a huge positive, one of the many positives about Caitlin Clark.